Now let's take a look at starring public channels that we like and putting them within a starred component just above our channels component. We'll first create this starred component within our side panel. So we'll go to the side panel file, and right underneath our user panel we'll create a custom starred component. We'll create a file for it within our side panel folder, where we'll import React up at the top. This will be a stateful component, the class name of starred. We'll have our render and return, and we'll export it. So back in side panel, we'll make sure to import that. Then for the markup within our starred component, we can just go to channels and grab the entire menu.menu component. So it'll have a structure very similar to our channels, and we'll need to import all of the components that we're using from Semantic UI. We'll need menu and icon. We'll change the icon name to star and give it a text of starred. We'll remove the icon and we'll display the number of starred channels with this starred channels property. We'll pass starred channels down to the displayed channels function. So we'll create starred channels within our state object, set that equal to an empty array, and we'll destructure that from state within render. Now we need to grab the display channels function since we're calling it. So we'll grab all that from channels. We'll change the argument there to starred channels and paste it in everywhere where we're using the channels parameter. We'll remove the label for notifications, but we'll add to state the active channel property, set equal to an empty string. Then we'll also need set active channel in order to update that value. And we'll grab the entire change channel function in order to execute it. And from that we can remove clear notifications, as well as where we're setting the channel property in state, since we don't have that here. And we'll import connect from react-redux, as well as set current channel and set private channel to allow us to switch to other public channels and update those values in our global state. So we'll add connect at the bottom. We'll wrap starred with it, set map state to props to null, and destructure both set current channel and set private channel from map dispatch to props. Now when we have new channels added to our starred component, we'll be able to display them to change channels just like we can in our channels component, set an active class for each channel that we're on, and display the number of channels within starred. Now we want to set up an on-click handler to the star icon within our messages header. So we'll head to the messages header component. We'll add an on-click to the icon. We'll set it equal to handle star, which will handle starring a given channel. And we'll create the function for this within our messages component, where first we'll add a property to state called isChannelStarred, set initially to false. So this will keep track as to whether a given channel has been starred previously. So now we'll create our handleStar function. When we call handleStar, we want to change isChannelStarred to its opposite value. And we'll do so using an inline function within setState where we get access to the entire previous state. And we'll update isChannelStarred according to that. We'll set it to not previous state dot isChannelStarred. That will always give us the opposite value. And then within the callback to setState, when isChannelStarred is updated, we'll execute a function called starChannel. This will check to see, first of all, if isChannelStarred is set to true, If so, for now we'll just log the text star. Otherwise, if it's set to false, we'll log unstar. So we'll add the functionality for starring and unstarring a channel there in just a minute. Then down within our render function, we want to destructure isChannelStarred from state, and to our messages header we want to pass handleStar, the handleStar function via props, as well as isChannelStarred. So now we're making handleStar available to the messages header for our icon. So now execute the handleStar function. And now on the icon, we want to change the appearance of it when a given channel has been starred. So based on whether isChannelStarred is set to true, we'll either give the name of the icon star or star outline. And as for the color, we'll set up a similar ternary where if a channel is starred, we'll set the color to yellow or black if not. We'll save that. Now let's test this out within our app. We'll try clicking on the icon for a given public channel, and we should see that the icon turns yellow. We see the log of star. If we click on it again, we see unstar, and it changes back to black and outlined. And we can click on this as many times as we like, and our isChannelStarred property is always updated correctly. So back within messages, let's add the functionality within star channel to actually update the data within our database. And in particular, we want to update the user object for a given user. We want to add a starred property to the user that stars the channel, and this starred property, starred object, will include an array of IDs for each channel that's starred, and that ID will include information about that channel, the name of the channel, the details about it, as well as who created the channel with a created by object. And that will include the name of the user as well as their avatar. So if we add this, you can see an example of what this will look like. This starred property with an array of IDs for each channel that's starred. So to implement this in our app, we'll head back to star channel, and we want to grab the users ref since we're updating a given user and their data. So we'll create a users ref property in state set to firebase.database.ref, the string of users. And we want to select a given child of that ref based on the user's ID. So we'll add some template literals. We'll interpolate the user's ID from state and add /starred to add this new property. Then we want to use the update method, where on the object we want to dynamically change the ID of the channel and its related data. So the ID will be set to an object with a name property, a details property, set to the channel name and the channel details in state. And we'll have our created by object, and we'll get that from this.state.channel.createdby.name and their avatar, where we just change the end of that path to .createdby.avatar. So for every channel that we star, we're adding a new channel ID with all the information about it. Then in the else case, we want to take the same child, the same user UID /starred, and then the child of that will be the channel ID, and use the remove method where once again we can catch any errors by making sure the error is not equal to null, and if so, we'll use a console error to display it in our console. So we'll save that. Now to test this out, let's star our first channel. Once we do that, we can see the new starred property added to our current user, which contains the channel ID of the channel we starred, as well as all of its related information within it. We can head to the second channel, star that as well, but when we flip back to the first channel, we don't see the star as yellow anymore, yet we still have all of the information for that channel within our starred property in the database. So our UI doesn't reflect what we have in our database, and even if we refresh, the star is still black and outlined. To get information about the channels that a given user is previously starred, we'll create another listener which will execute within component.didMount. So in the component mounts, we're going to call add user stars listener, which will take the current channel ID as well as the current user UID. And the add user stars listener will take both of these values in order to get all of the channels and the related information about the channels that the user has starred. So we'll take the user's ref, we'll select a child based on the user ID and a child of starred to get the entire starred property. Want to use the once method to get its value, and then within the then statement we'll get the data and we'll make sure that data.value is not equal to null, so we have a value for the starred property, and we'll create a variable called channel IDs. So we'll get all of the channel IDs that a given user has saved and get an array of them using object.keys, and we'll take this array of IDs and use the includes method to check to see if our given channel ID is present within it. We'll set the return value to previously starred, and if it finds it within this array, if includes finds it, it'll return a value of true, and we want to update is channel starred based on the previously starred variable, what's stored in it. So we'll save that, head back, and we can see immediately that our star for our first channel is yellow, reflecting what we have in our database, and the star for our second channel is yellow as well. So we can toggle that, refresh the page. We can see our first channel once again is starred and the second channel is not, which lines up with our database for our given user. Now that we're able to star and unstar channels, we want those channels to show up in a user's starred component. So head to side panel, and in order to display all the channels that a user starred, we need to have information about the current user. So we'll pass down the current user prop to starred, and then within starred, like we have in other components, we'll create a user property referencing our current user prop that we're passing down, and we'll need the user's ref to reach out to our users collection. So we'll import Firebase from a couple of folders up, and the user's ref will take the database module and the user's ref. So in the component mounts, we want to set up a listener. So we'll execute a function called add listeners that will create. And add listeners will listen on the user's ref for any new changes to the starred property. So first we need to select a child on it according to the user's UID. So within component.didMount we can set up a conditional to make sure that first we have a value in state for our current user, and once we do, we can pass down their UID, and we'll receive that in our add listeners function as user ID. So now we can select a child with the user ID and their starred property, and first we want to listen for when a user stars a new channel. So we'll listen for the child added event, and in the snap callback we'll create a variable called starred channel where we'll assemble an object, a new object with an ID property set to snap.key, and then spread the rest of the values with the spread operator, we'll spread all of snap.value to get the rest of the properties for a given channel's information. And then we're going to set the state. We're going to update the starred channels array by creating a new array where we take all the previous values of starred channels and once again spread them in to the array with the spread operator and add this new starred channel object at the very end. And we also want to listen for when a channel is unstarred. So we'll take the user's ref again and select user ID as a child and starred as a child, and we'll listen for the child removed event. So here we want to remove some channel information that was previously in our starred channels array. So once again we'll create an object and we'll assign it to a variable called channel to remove. Once again it'll have the ID of snap.key, and we'll spread the rest of the values for that channel into the new object. We'll create a variable called filtered channels, and we're going to take the starred channels array, use the filter method on it to make sure this new array doesn't have an element that has an ID property equal to the ID of the channel to remove object. And finally we want to update the starred channels array in state to the filtered channels array that we just created. Now we'll save all of our files, head back to our app, and now you can see in our starred area we have both of the channels that we've starred, React and JavaScript, so we can click on them and navigate to the channel and also unstar them, and as we unstar them you'll see that they're immediately removed from the starred component. We can add them back by favoriting them once again. Now let's build out our meta panel component, which will include information about the channel that a user is currently on. We'll head to the meta panel file within our meta panel folder, and we'll import some components from semantic UI. We'll grab segment, accordion, header, and icon. So we'll use an accordion component here. It'll be within a segment component, and first we'll have our header. It'll be as an h3. It'll be attached to the top of the segment, and it'll have the text about hashmark and then the channel name, which will display dynamically in a bit. Then we'll have our accordion component. It'll be styled with the styled prop and attached as well by setting the attached prop to true. And within our accordion component we'll have a number of segments, each of which will be conditionally shown when we click on the title. So when we click on this first accordion title, if the active index is 0, and that's the index we're going to give this part of the accordion, if active index is 0, it'll be active. It will display the content associated with the title that we're creating. So we'll add an active index property to state, set initially to 0, we'll destructure it within render. So each of these title areas, as well as their related content, will have a given index, and we'll add an on-click to each of them. If we click on a title, we're going to set the active index and therefore display the part of the accordion with an index of a certain value. So to active index we're passing event and title props, which will give us access to the index that we set on the title. So if we click on a certain part of the accordion, we'll grab the index from the title props we're passing to set active index, and we'll also grab active index from state. And we're going to update active index with a variable called new index. If active index is equal to the index on our title props, we'll give it the value of -1, otherwise the index that's being passed when we click a given part of the accordion, and which will set new index to the active index. It'll update it and show that part of the accordion with the given index value that we're setting in state. And within the title we're going to put an icon, first with the name of dropdown. That'll be present within every accordion title that we have in our accordion, and then we'll add our own custom icon with the name of info. So in this part of the accordion, we're going to have the channel details that we set for each channel. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have the content related to a given title. To display this according to the active index value, we'll need to grab the active prop that we supplied to the accordion title, where active index is being compared with 0. And for now, we'll just give our content the text of details. We'll copy both the title and content and paste another segment to the accordion underneath, where we'll then change the index to 1 and compare active index to 1 here, change the icon to user circle, and our second icon, this will be the area for our top posters, and here with the accordion content we'll compare active index with 1 again, and then in the next segment that we'll paste in, we'll compare active index with 2. It'll have an index of 2, an icon of pencil alternate. The text will be created by within the title. We'll compare active index to 2 within the accordion content for the active prop, and we'll just give it a default text of creator for now. So now we have our accordion. We can toggle between different segments of it, and we can see the default text that we put in each area. But now we want to hide the meta panel whenever we click on a direct messages channel. We only want to see the meta panel to give us or the user information whenever we click on a new public channel. So within app.js, we're going to pass down an isPrivateChannel prop, the value of isPrivateChannel, to our meta panel. And as we know, we need to give it a key so that it renders properly. We'll give it a key with the current channel ID by first making sure we have a current channel value, and we'll receive that within our state of meta panel, set the state property to private channel, and within render, if we're currently in a private channel, and we can also destructure that from state, if we're in a private channel, we want to return null. We want to return nothing. So we'll save that, and we'll try navigating to a direct messages channel, and we can see that the meta panel goes away but appears once again whenever we go back to a public channel. Now we want to display channel information in each of the accordion segments that we created, and we want to do that as we change the channel. So we want to provide dynamically to our meta panel information about the current channel. So we'll pass down current channel information as props to our meta channel component, and we'll set that in state as the property name channel. We'll destructure that from our state object, and first within the header we'll grab channel.name to get the channel name, and within channel details for the accordion content we will just output channel.details. For the posters, we'll cover that in a later section for our top posters. And then in the last accordion segment, where we want to display who created a given channel, we'll first use an image component, which we'll grab from Semantic UI. And we're going to set the source of that to channel.createdby.avatar to get the user's avatar who created the channel. And then underneath that we'll add the name with channel.createdby.name. We'll save both of those files, and when we head back to our app we don't get anything because we're getting this error, can't read property name of null. So it takes a certain amount of time for, in our global state, the channel data to be set. So we want to set up a conditional where if we don't have a channel, we're going to return null just like we did with private channel. So then as the channel data is put on global state, we get information about it, we get our channel details, and we get our created by user and their avatar and name. Now another way of handling this, waiting for a channel data to come in, is we'll remove the conditional, and instead of returning null, we'll add a loading prop to our segment. So if we don't have any channel data, we'll say not channel, we'll provide a loading spinner to the entire segment. And then for each piece of data that we're getting, we'll set up a conditional where we'll first make sure that we have channel data. We'll say channel and then use the double and operator to display the property on the channel. So we'll do that for each of those dynamic values that we added. So now we can see this loading spinner, and as our channel data comes in, I'll refresh the page one more time so you can see that we're getting a loading spinner over the entire meta panel. And then as a last step, I'll add a header component to the last segment and put in the username and image into that, just to format the created by information a bit better. I'll set this as an H3, set an image prop of circular on the image component. So now if we take a look at our created by segment, we can see that the username is a bit bigger and the avatar for the creator is now circular. Now as part of the last step, we want to display all the top posters for a given channel, all of the individuals who have posted the most in a given channel. So back in our messages component, we're going to head up to the add message listener function and execute a new function that we'll create called count user posts, and it'll take all the loaded messages. We can add this new function anywhere, but I'll head down to count unique users and add count user posts underneath. So count user posts will take the accumulated array of messages for each channel, and we'll create a variable called user posts which will store the return value of iterating over this messages array with the reduce method, and the accumulator for reduce will be initially set to an empty object, not an empty array. We'll loop over every message. We'll first check to see within the body of reduce whether there's a property on the accumulated object with the name of the current message username. If so, we're going to take the object that this username property is set equal to and increment its count property by 1. Otherwise, we're going to add a new object onto the accumulated object with the property name of the username who created the message, and this will have a property of avatar, the user's avatar, as well as a count of 1, since this is the first time finding a message with the given username. And then at the end we'll return the accumulator, and then we want to log the object that's stored within user posts. So if we take a look at our console after the page loads, we can see for the channel that we're currently on, we get an object with a number of properties, each set equal to a username, with an avatar value and a count value set equal to the count of messages that they've added to a given channel. So this is what we'll use within the meta panel to display the top posters. But instead of just logging this object, we want to put it on global state so the meta panel can make use of it. So we'll create a new action which will execute called set user posts. It'll take that user post object. We'll create a type for it within the types file called set user posts, and that'll be equal to a string of the same name. And now to create a function within the index file of our actions folder, once again this will be called set user posts. It'll take some user post data and it's going to return an object first with the type from action types.setUserPosts, and then the payload, and it'll have just a property name of user posts with the value of user posts. Then within our reducers folder, we're going to add another property to initial channel state, user posts set equal to null initially. We'll add a new case to our channel reducer of action types.setUserPosts, where we'll return an object where we spread all of the initial values of state and update only the userPost property to action.payload.userPost. So now we can make use of this new action on our props object, but to put it there for our messages component, we need to grab the connect function from react-redux and we'll import our action, setUserPost. And we'll head down to the bottom to execute our connect function to make our new action available within the messages component. So map state to props will be set to null, and we'll pluck off setUserPost from map dispatch to props. We'll save all of our files. We'll head back to our app. If we take a look at our Redux tools, we take a look at our channel property of state, we should see an updated userPost property containing all of the values that we had before logged to our console. Now that we're putting our userPost object on global state, we're going to head to app.js and use map state to props to get the current value of userPost from state.channel.userPost and pass it down once again by destructuring userPost from the app props down to the meta panel component. So now we'll head to meta panel and we'll receive this directly from props instead of putting it on state. We'll pluck userPost off from the props object. Then we'll head down to the accordion content for our top posters area. We'll first check to make sure that we have a value for userPost, and if so, we'll execute a function called displayTopPosters, which will pass the userPost object to. So we'll create this new function above our render. So displayTopPosters will take the posts, and to make this object easier to work with, we'll use the function object.entries. So it'll accept our post object that we're passing to it, and just to display how object.entries works, I'll create a simple object stored by the variable a, with a couple of properties. What object.entries does is it'll take this object and convert both the key for an object as well as its value to its own array and put that within an array. So in the end, when we pass an object to object.entries, we'll have an array of arrays, so we can use any array method we like with it. The first array method that we can make use of is sort. So sort takes a function with parameters a and b, and if we take b of the index of 1 minus a of the index of 1, we can compare the count value of each of the top posters and show them in descending order from greatest count of posts to least count of posts. Then we can use the map method, and within the parameters of map we can destructure the key and value for each of the elements of the array and then use them in the markup that we'll output in order to display all of our top posters. So the component that we'll need is the list component from Semantic UI. And we'll actually wrap our conditional, where we have userPosts and our displayTopPosters function, in a list component. And then back within displayTopPosters, we'll iterate over a list item. So the key prop for the list item will be set to the index of the current element we're iterating over. So we can also grab the index, even though we're destructuring key and value from the parameters of map. Then within the list item, we'll add an image component the prop of avatar and a source of val.avatar. Then we'll have a list content component. Within that will be a list header. We'll make that as an A tag. The content of key. So the key will be the name of the top poster. And then a list description with value val.count and the text of post to get the total count of posts that they've added to a given channel. So if we take a look at that, we can see a given user, their name, their avatar, and the number of posts that they've contributed. If we switch to a different channel, we can see we just have one poster here since there's only one user who's added posts to this React channel. And then finally at the end, if we want to limit the number of top posters to a specific amount, we can use the slice method and say get only the first 5 top posters. Say if we have more than 5 elements within our array. And lastly, if we want to handle the case that we're incorrectly formatting this post value, if sometimes we need to provide a text of post, if the number of posts is singular, or plural if there's multiple posts, or 0, we can create this format count function which takes the val.count amount, and we'll first check to see if the number that it takes is greater than 1 or equal to 0. If so, we want to use posts plural, otherwise posts singular for the text. So now if we take a look at top posters, you can see that if we have multiple posts for a given user, it's plural, and if we just have one post, it's singular. Now let's move on to our color panel. We created this button that we'll be able to click on, and we want to display a modal to our users for them to be able to choose the colors of their app. So we want to create a kind of color picker. So we'll head to the color panel component. We're going to bring in a modal component, the icon component, and label components from Semantic UI. And we want to first add an onClick to our button, which will open a modal. So first we want to create a state object with a modal property set initially to false, and we've covered this a number of times. We'll create an open modal function where it'll set the state of the modal property to true. We'll copy that. We'll create a close modal function which will set the modal property to false. And underneath the button, we'll create our color picker modal. So this will consist of the modal component, where we'll have basic styling. It'll open according to the modal property and state. So we'll destructure modal from state, and it'll have an onClose prop set to our close modal function. So within our modal, we'll first have a header with the text of choose app colors. Then we'll have a content area, and then an actions area. So in actions, we'll have 2 buttons. The first with the color of green, prop of inverted, an icon within it with the name set to checkmark, with the text of save colors. We'll copy that and paste another one in underneath with the color of red, the name of remove for the icon, and a text of cancel. Now within our modal content area, we want to show a color picker, which will allow users to pick the color that they want for their app. We'll use the package React Color for this, which gives us a number of color pickers to choose from with a number of different styles. So you can certainly choose any of the ones available that you see on their documentation page, but I'm going to choose the slider component that they have available. So to import that, up at the top, we'll grab slider picker from React color, and then we'll put that within our content area, first with the label component. We'll label it with the text of primary color. Then we'll have our first slider picker for the primary color of our app, and then another label with the text of secondary color, and another picker to choose the secondary color. Then once we save our files and take a look in our app at the modal by clicking on the button in our color panel, we can see both of our slider pickers. And these are pretty neat because they allow us to pick a certain part of the color spectrum and narrow down the color we want with these different shades. And we also want to toggle the modal by clicking on the cancel button. So the last thing we'll do is add an on-click to our cancel button, which will reference our close modal function. So now we can show our color picker modal by clicking on the plus button and hide it by clicking on the cancel button. Now when we click on the color picker modal, we want to be able to choose a color and then hit save colors to create a new option within our color panel for the colors of our app. So within the color panel component, we'll bring in the segment component. We want to use this to wrap both of our labels and slider pickers for primary color and secondary color within our modal content area. And on each of these segments we'll set a prop of inverted so you can see the text of the label. And then within our state we'll add a couple of properties, one called primary and set to a string, and one of secondary. So we want to use an onChange handler for both of these slider pickers, and our first onChange will be set equal to a function handleChangePrimary, and the second will reference handleChangeSecondary. So we'll first create handleChangePrimary, and instead of passing through an event, we have access to the color itself. So we have this color object, and it has a hex property on it, where you can get the hex code of the color that we selected with the primary color picker. And we can modify handleChangePrimary to handleChangeSecondary to use the hex property of color to update the secondary color in state as well. So once we save that, we will open our React DevTools. We'll go to our color panel component. And when we pull up the state and we select a color for primary and secondary, we can see that they're updated in our state object, but the slider isn't moving to the part of the picker that we're selecting. This is because we're not passing the values from primary and secondary in state back down to our slider picker components. So we need to make both of our slider pickers controlled components by passing primary and secondary down to the color prop on our respective slider pickers. So now when we do that, save our file and try updating the colors in our state again. We'll bring up the color panel, open the modal. We can now change the area of the slider that we're selecting and the hex code that's attached to the primary and secondary values in state. We could also set primary and secondary to initial values, since we're making these controlled components, and display by default a certain part of the slider picker, for example the green and purple colors like we have selected here. And upon saving our colors by clicking on the Save Colors button, we want to create a colors property for our currently authenticated user, which will contain an array of unique IDs, and on them will be information about the colors that we chose: the primary color with its corresponding hex code and the secondary color with its hex code. So colors will be a new property on our user object, within our users collection. And to implement this, we'll head back to our color panel, and we'll add an on-click to our Save Colors button, referencing a handle save colors function which we'll create. So handle save colors will first have a little bit of validation to make sure that we have values for both the primary color and the secondary color in state. So we'll say if this.state.primary and this.state.secondary, and to set up this validation, we'll remove the colors, the hex codes that we had previously set for primary and secondary. And if we have values for both primary and secondary, we'll execute a function called save colors, and we can pass the primary value and secondary value to save colors, and we'll call them primary and secondary. And we want to reach out to Firebase, and in particular we want to use the users ref to select a particular user. So we'll need to import Firebase, and then using the users ref, we want to add a child with the current user ID. So we need to add a user property in state, referencing this.props.current user, and then pass our current user data down to our color panel. So we'll do that in app.js. And once again, we'll provide a key, and we'll provide a somewhat unique identifier with current user.name. You'll notice that we already use current user.uid for the side panel. However, we're sharing the same key value for meta panel and messages, so we'll change the key value to current channel.name for the meta panel. We want each of our components to have a different key value, so we don't have any problems with passing down props or with rendering each of the components. Now we can reference the colors property for our user. We'll push a unique identifier onto this new property, and we'll use the update method to push an object with both the primary and secondary colors, which we're getting from the parameters of save colors. And then within the then statement, we're going to log colors added. If that's successful, we're going to close the modal and then catch any errors with catch, where we'll just use a console error. So now once we save that and test out saving our first set of colors, we'll open the modal and pick a couple of colors, a couple of particular shades of a given color. We'll hit save colors, and looks like we're getting an error. We're trying to provide a path of object / colors within our save colors function. So this needs to be this.state.user.uid / colors. So now let's try this again. We'll pick another set of colors. Then we'll hit save. If we take a look at our log, we see that the colors were added, our modal was closed, and now for our currently authenticated user, we have a colors property with a unique ID and the colors that we chose saved as keys primary and secondary. Now we want to display the sets of colors that a user has picked and saved using the color picker modal in our color panel. To do that, we'll first add a component did mount to set up a listener where we'll check to see if we have a value for our user property in state. We'll create an add listener function. In fact, we'll execute it with the user UID value, we'll create this function which takes the user ID, where we'll first create a variable called user colors, set this equal to an empty array. We'll take the user's ref, select a child, which will reference the user ID / colors to get everything on the colors property. Then we'll add an event of child added, and in the snap callback we'll collect all of the user colors that a given user has selected and put them onto the beginning of the array using the unshift method and pass the snap's value. So if we log what we've collected into our user colors array, we see we only have one set of colors so far in that array, but this is the first step to displaying them. The next thing we need to do is set state. We'll set a user colors property in state, so we'll update user colors from an empty array to the colors that we collect with our child added event. Then within render, we'll pull off user colors from state, and we'll create a function, display user colors, and pass the user colors array to it. Display user colors will take the colors array, where it'll first check to see that the length is greater than 0 to see that we have colors. Then it'll map over the array, where for each color we're going to display it in a fragment. We're going to pull off the index of the color we're iterating over and set it as the key on the fragment. We'll first add a divider component, then a div, the class of color container, within that another div, the class of color square, and within that a class of color overlay. So this color square div will have a background style set to color.primary, the primary color that we've set for a given pair of colors, and color overlay will have a background set to color.secondary. So now we want to style a kind of custom icon to display both of our colors. So within app.css, we'll create a section for colorpanel.js. We'll begin with the color container, and this will have a position relative, an overflow of hidden, a width of 35 pixels, a border radius of 3 pixels to round it a bit. Then we'll have our color square class with a width of 35 pixels, a height of 35 pixels. Then for color overlay, it'll have a width of 85 pixels, a height of 35 pixels, and transform set to rotate 225 degrees. So these styles that we applied to each of the classes will allow us to create a kind of icon, a square icon, that's rounded and includes both of the colors as triangles adjacent to one another. So it's clear that we want to update the app colors with the colors displayed in this icon. We'll add an onClick to the color container div, and we want to execute an action called setColors, which we'll create, and we'll put this on multiple lines. And we need an inline arrow function so that we can pass through the arguments color.primary and color.secondary. So we want to set these colors on global state. So we'll create within our types file a colors action types section. We're going to have our first type of set colors set equal to a string of the same name. Then in our index file of actions, we'll create a color actions area where we'll have our set colors action. It'll take in a primary color and a secondary color for our app. It's going to return a type of action types dot set colors and a payload object with the property and value of primary color and secondary color. We'll head to our reducers file. We'll create another reducer function. It's going to put its resulting values on this colors property of state. So we'll add that to combine reducers. And once again, our first step will be to create an initial colors state object, which will have an initial value of primary color and secondary color as empty strings. Our colors reducer function will have a default value of state set to initial colors state and the action. We'll switch based on the action type. Our first case will be action types.setColors, where we want to return an object where we're accepting the value of primary color from the action, in particular the action payload, and the value for secondary color from our action payload. And of course we need a default case in case none of our cases are met. So back in color panel, once again we'll need connect, and we'll need the action that we just made, set colors. Then we'll wire everything together at the bottom. Connect, we'll wrap color panel. We'll set map state to props to null and destructure our set colors action. We'll save everything and we'll add one more rule to our color container of cursor pointer to give a little pointer icon to let our user know that this icon's clickable. And once we click on it, we'll open our Redux DevTools. And we should see on our state object this colors property with primary color and secondary color updated to the values contained on the icon. So now in app.js we need to use map state to props, and we want to get primary color from state.colors.primary color and secondary color from state.colors.secondary color. We want to provide both of these colors in different places in our app. So we'll first destructure both of those values from the app props. Before we replace the background rules that we've set using the style props for a number of components with primary color and secondary color, we want to go back to our reducers folder and set the initial values for primary color and secondary color in initial colors state. I want to set the primary color to 4C, 3C, 4C, the hex code, and the secondary color to EEE. So now this allows us to replace each of the background rules with either secondary color or primary color, where we've set that using the style props. So we'll set the grid component to a background of secondary color, and that will give it the default value of the hex code EEE. We'll pass down primary color via props to our side panel component, and within side panel you can see we have the background rule set for our menu component. So we'll destructure primary color from its props and replace background with primary color. We'll also pass it down to our user panel so that when we navigate to that component, we can change its background rule with primary color and make sure to destructure that from the props object, primary color from props. We can directly set that as a value to background. Now we can save all of those files, and when our page reloads for our app, we should see the initial colors that we've always had for our application, but when we click on the icon, we should see immediately the colors change to the colors that the user set on the icon. So if we choose some new app colors, for example, say this dark red, as well as some green hue, let's say a darker green, we click on save, we should see a new icon with both of those colors. When we click on that, the primary and secondary colors of our app should change globally. Let's create a modal when we click on Change Avatar to give our users the ability to change their avatar as they like. So in our user panel component, on the span for the text Change Avatar, we'll connect an open modal function, and we'll bring in the modal component from semantic UI, and in the state we'll set the modal property to false, and open modal will set the modal property and state to true. We'll copy this function, and for a function called close modal, we'll use that to set modal to false. We'll destructure modal from state and render, and at the bottom, before the closing tag of our grid column, we're going to include our change user avatar modal. So once again, we'll create a modal component with some basic styling. The open will be linked to the modal value and state, and on close will be linked to the close modal function. Our modal will have a header, the text change avatar, as well as the content, which includes an input. So we'll grab the input component from semantic UI, the input will have a prop of fluid, type of file, a label of new avatar to change their avatar to a new image file, the name of preview image. Underneath this input we'll have a grid component, which will have the prop of centered and stackable. There'll be two columns within this grid, so these columns can stack one on top of another. We'll first include a grid row, which will also have the prop of centered, and then a grid column within it with the class name of UI center aligned grid. So this is a semantic UI class, and within this column we'll have the image preview, and the next column will have the cropped image preview to allow users to crop their avatar image as they like. Underneath the modal content, we'll have some buttons in modal actions. We'll bring in the button component. And this first button will have the color of green, will be inverted, and within the button tags of an icon, the name of save, with the text of change avatar. We'll copy this button and paste it in 2 more times underneath. The next button will have an icon with the name of image and the text of preview. And the last button will have a color of red, the name of remove for the icon, and the text of cancel. And on the cancel button we'll add an on click connected to close modal function to close our modal. Let's test this out, see if we can toggle our change avatar modal. So let's head to change avatar in the drop down. We see our modal and we can close it with the cancel button. Next, we want to be able to click on our change avatar option, choose a file, and have a preview displayed underneath the file input in order for us to crop. So back in user panel, on the input we'll add an onChange to put the file that we select within state. It'll reference a handle change function, and handle change will take an event where once again we'll have a file variable. It'll reference the first file in the files array from event.target, and here we're going to use the file reader API in order to, once we check to make sure that we have a file within our file variable, we're going to use the reader and this read as a data URL method to read the file, where then our reader will listen for the load event, and in the callback to that we're going to set the preview image property within state to reader.result. So we'll create preview image, set that to an empty string in state, and now we want to bring in a tool called Avatar Editor from React Avatar Editor, and this is what we'll use to crop the image, the preview image that we now have access to. So we'll destructure preview image from state, and then within the first grid column we'll take the preview image, and if we have a preview image we're going to show the avatar editor component, where it accepts an image prop which we'll set equal to preview image. We'll give it a width of 120 pixels and a height of the same, and a border of 50 pixels, and we can scale the image with a value of 1.2 to make it zoomed in a bit more. So now once we save that and we select change avatar, we choose a file, now we can see our avatar editor. So now what's selected within this box is what we'll use to crop our image, and then we'll click on the preview button in order to perform the cropping. So we'll add an onClick to our preview button, set that equal to handle crop image. So we'll create this new function. To crop our preview image, we need to add a ref to our avatar editor component. So I'll add this ref prop, and on the ref we want to create an inline function. We pass through this value of node and assign it to avatar editor. So avatar editor is now in our class. We can reference it with this.avatarEditor. We'll first check to see that we have this reference. Then on this ref we can execute the method getImageScaledToCanvas. This will do the cropping of our image, and we want to convert this to an image blob, so we'll use the method toBlob. Within that callback we get access to the return blob. We want to create an image URL by taking the createObjectURL method and passing in the blob, and we want to set state. We want to put the image URL that we're creating on this cropped image property and pass the blob to its own property in state. So the cropped image property will allow us to see another preview of the image that we've selected with the avatar editor component, and the blob will be necessary for sending the image file over to Firebase storage. So we'll destructure cropped image from state within render, and then within our second grid column we're going to first check to see if we have a value for cropped image in state. If so, we're going to render an image component whose style property will be set to margin equal to 3.5 ems auto, a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels, a source set to cropped image. Then we'll head down to our change avatar button. We'll set up a conditional where we'll only show this button if we have a cropped image. And once we save that file, we can test this out. We'll go to change avatar, we'll choose a file, we'll see our preview, and once we click on the preview button we can see the cropped image with the selection that we chose. We can change that selection and hit preview again if we like to get a different crop. And then in the next section we'll set up the functionality for our change avatar button in order to persist the changes that we made with our image. We're now cropping the preview image that we have for our avatar. Now we want to enable the functionality for our change avatar button to actually change the image that's associated with a given user. So we'll add an on-click to our change avatar button, which will reference a new function called upload cropped image. So as the name suggests, it will upload the image that a user has cropped to Firebase storage. So we'll create this function, and in order to upload our image we'll need to reference our storage in Firebase with a storage ref in state, which will use firebase.storage and an empty ref. So we'll use this storage ref, and above it we can destructure it from state. So the path to it is just storage ref. Then we want to put a child on it, and we'll use some template literals to reference avatars / user dash, and then we'll interpolate the current user ID. And instead of getting the current user information from props, we're going to create a user ref, which is going to reference firebase.auth.currentUser. So this is an alternate way to get the current user's UID value. We can destructure user ref from state and get their ID with userref.uid. We'll use the put method to put our image in Firebase storage, and we want to grab the blob from state and also put some associated metadata with it. So we'll create a metadata object in state, which will have a content type property with the file type image/JPEG. With this metadata object, we're going to be uploading all of our images as JPEG files. We'll add a then after executing put, where we're going to get the snapback after uploading our image, and on the ref property we're going to execute the getDownloadURL method. We'll add a then, since this is a promise, where we'll get the download URL from Firebase storage, and we want to set a property in state called uploaded cropped image with the download URL. So we'll create uploaded cropped image within our state. And within the callback, where we're setting this property, we want to call a function called changeAvatar. So at this point we've done the first part. We've uploaded an image to Firebase storage as an image blob, and within changeAvatar we're going to first take this user ref that we have and call the update profile method on it in order to update our user's photo URL property. And we'll update it with the download URL that's within this.state.uploaded cropped image. We'll add a then, since this is a promise, where we'll log photo URL updated, and we'll close the modal, and we'll catch any errors with catch. And in addition to updating a user's profile with the user ref, we want to update their associated data on our user's ref in our Firebase database. We'll create a user's ref property referencing firebase.database in the users collection. We'll set a child on the user's ref to get the logged in user. And we'll use this.state.uid. We want to update their information, and specifically the avatar property, with this.state.uploaded cropped image. And then if that returns successfully, we'll get a log of user avatar updated, and once again we'll catch any errors. We'll save all of our files. We'll also make sure to destructure the metadata property from state within upload cropped image if you haven't already. We'll try going through the entire process of changing our avatar. We'll select change avatar. We'll choose a new image file. We'll select the crop that we want, and we'll hit preview. And finally we'll click on change avatar. And we can see immediately within our avatar image and our user panel that the avatar was changed. We see both of our logs, user avatar updated, photo URL updated. If we take a look at the data for our currently authenticated user in our database, we should see that the avatar URL now references Firebase storage. If we take a look at our storage, we should see a new folder of avatars. If we click on that, we see user dash and then some cryptic string, and there we should find the image that we uploaded, our cropped image. We can see its name, size, the type of image / JPEG, when it was created. And now if we try adding a new message to one of our channels, we can see our new avatar next to our message. When other users are typing in the same channel that we're currently in, it'd be nice to see an animation at the very bottom of the given channel in order to see that they're preparing a message, other users are preparing a message. So we'll head to our message form component, and we'll begin by adding an on key down handler to our message input. This will reference a new function called handle key down. So we'll create our handle key down function, say underneath handle change. Handle key down will be a bit different. It won't take an event, but it'll first check to see if we have some value stored in our message property of state. We can destructure that from state within the function. Then we'll access a typing ref. So we'll create a new property within state called typing ref. This will reference a new collection in our database we haven't used before with the name of typing assigned to it. We can grab that from state as well. It'll have a child set equal to the channel ID that we're currently in, and another child with the user ID. We'll make sure to destructure that as well from state. And nested within these two children, we're going to set a value of user.displayName, so the user's name if they're currently typing in a given channel. Otherwise, if we don't have a message, we're going to remove that value that we just set on the typing ref. So to test this out, we'll type into a given channel, take a look at our database. We should see a new typing collection with the channel ID, within that the user UID and the name of the user. And once we remove everything from the message input, we remove all the text, we should see that typing collection removed entirely. And when we're sending a message, of course, the current user is no longer typing. So within the then, once we've successfully sent off a message, we want to remove the typing ref that references the current user. And we'll destructure user from state within send message, as well as the typing ref. When we change a channel, we want to remove the typing ref as well for a given user. So within change channel in our channels component, we'll reference the typing ref from state. We'll pass in the channel ID to the first child, user UID to the second child, and use the remove method again. And within channels, of course, we need to first create the typing ref. So if we change a channel, we're obviously no longer typing in the channel we were previously in. So that's why it's being removed. Now to test both of these cases out, we'll first type into our input. We see our typing collection. If we send a message, we see that that is removed for our current user. We type in again, we see that it's added. If we switch to a different channel, we see that the entire collection is removed. So this is the approach that we'll use to determine if other users are typing in the same channel that we're currently in. Now let's move on to our typing animation for each of the users that are currently typing in a given channel. We'll create a typing component within our messages folder, where first we'll import React. This will be a stateless functional component, where we'll have a typing div, a div with the class of typing, which will contain 3 divs with the class of typing __ dot. At the end, we'll export our typing component, and then at the bottom of app.css, we'll create a new area for our typing component, where first we'll have a user typing class where font style will be set to italic, the font weight will be bold, and it'll have a margin right of 3 pixels. So this will be the text next to our animation. The typing class will have a width of 5 ems, a height of 2 ems, a position of relative, padding of 10 pixels, margin left 5 pixels, a background with the hex code E6, 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 a border radius of 20 pixels, and our typing dot class will be floated to the left. We'll have a width of 8 pixels, a height of 8 pixels, a margin of 0 and 4 pixels, and a background color of 8D8C91, a border radius of 50%, an opacity of 0, and we'll create an animation with the name loading fade. It'll be 1 second and it'll be an infinite animation. We're going to select the first typing dot class with the nth child selector. We'll select the first typing dot by passing that a 1. It'll have an animation delay of 0. The second typing dot class will have a delay of 0.2 seconds, and the third delay of 0.4 seconds. So the animation for each dot will be slightly offset. To create our animation, we'll add an @ keyframes with the name of loading fade, At 0%, the opacity of the animation will be 0. At 50%, we'll have an opacity of 0.8. And at 100%, it'll go back to 0. So now in our messages component, we'll make sure to import our typing component from /typing, and then to display it, just to preview this, we'll go within our comment group, where we'll create a span with the class name of user__typing, and just as some sample text, we'll say Douglas is typing, include the typing component to the right hand side, and we'll wrap both the span and the typing component with a div with the style prop with the style rules display set to flex, align items set to center, and this will center our span and our typing component along the y-axis. So now you can see the text and our typing animation. So this is what will be shown for any user that's typing within the same channel that we're currently in. We've created our typing component. Now we want to display this component for every user that's typing within the same channel that our currently authenticated user is in. So we'll add and execute a new listener function, then add listeners in our messages component called add typing listeners. It'll accept the channel ID, and within this function we'll first create an array called typing users to collect all the users typing within a given channel based on its ID. So on the state object, we'll add our typing ref, referencing firebase.database, and a ref with the string of typing. So we'll take this .state.typing ref, we'll pass channel ID as a child to it, and we'll listen for the child added event. And within the snap, we'll first check to see if snap.key is not equal to this.state.user.uid, and we're performing this check to make sure that we're not collecting the currently authenticated user within this typing users array. We'll use the concat method to concatenate an object on the end of the array with an ID set to snap.key and a name property set to snap.value. So we're collecting the user's ID and their name, and we're reassigning the typing users array, and we'll set state. We'll set our typing users array within state, so I need to create this new property, initially set to an empty array. And we'll also have, in addition to our child added event, we're going to have our child removed event with the same child of channel ID on our typing ref. And within the snap callback, we're going to take the typing users array, we're going to use the findIndex method, which will iterate over every user element. We want to compare the user ID property with snap.key, and if there's not an index value, that's positive. If an index can't be found, we're going to use the filter method, where we'll iterate once again over the typing users array, and we'll make sure that none of the IDs within each of these elements is equal to snap.key. We'll reassign the typing users array once again and set the state. Now that we're listening for children being added or removed from our typing ref, we're going to once again use the connected ref to determine whether a user is online or not, and that'll reference firebase.database, a ref with the text .info/connected. We'll take the connected ref from state, we'll listen for a value change, and within the snap callback, we'll first check to see if snap.value is equal to true. Then we'll take the typing ref, we'll take a child on it of the channel ID, a child with the current user's user ID. We'll add the onDisconnect method, and we'll also add remove, so when our currently authenticated user logs out, their child value on the typing ref will be removed. Now we'll head down to render, and first we'll destructure typing users from state, and we'll head down to our div where we were outputting a span with the text that we provided as well as our typing component, and replace that with a call to a new function called display typing users, where we'll pass the typing users array. So we want to iterate over all of the elements in this typing users array in state. We first want to check to make sure the length of that array is greater than 0. If so, we'll map over it with the map method, and we'll paste in the markup that we copied, where we'll change, first of all, the style prop to include a margin bottom rule of 0.2 ems, and give it a key prop set to user.id. We'll replace the hard-coded username with user.name. We'll save our changes, and once again I'll deploy my app with the now CLI, and once it's deployed I'll paste in the deployed URL to a different tab and bring this over to the side. We'll sign in with a different user than the one currently authenticated in our dev server. So I'll make sure that I'm on the same channel of React. You can see now we have our typing animation saying that Thomas is typing, and if our other user types in Thomas's page, you can see that Douglas is typing. We can remove this animation if we clear our message input, and if we start typing again, you can see it again. If we post our message, the typing animation goes away, and the same for our other user. If we switch back to another channel, we'll see that we only see that typing animation when our users are on the same channel. So now we've got our functionality to display when other users in the same channel are typing. Now let's add our emoji picker when we click on this plus button next to our message input in order to add emojis to our messages. We'll head to the message form, and up at the top we'll import a couple of things from the package EmojiMart. We'll grab first the emoji picker and emoji index. And we want to bring in the related styles for that, for the picker, from emojimart/css/emojimart.css. Then we'll head down to our message input, and on the label prop we'll add an onClick to the button within it set to handle toggle picker. So this new function, which we'll create underneath handle key down, we'll toggle the emoji picker that we brought in. So we'll set a property on state called emoji picker. It'll be to the opposite value of emoji picker. So we'll set that within state to an initial value of false. And then we'll head back down and destructure this new emoji picker property from state within render, and we'll now show the emoji picker component conditionally based on the value of this emoji picker value in state, So we'll have our picker component with a set of emojis set to Apple. So we'll have the Apple emojis. We'll attach a class name to it of emoji picker, which we'll create. We'll give it a title value of pick your emoji, and we'll include an emoji of point up next to the title. So now let's create our emoji picker class in app.css, where we just want to set position to absolute. We'll save both of our files, and we'll click on the plus button. Now we can see our emoji picker component. So we have a big set of emojis to pick from. We have our title of pick your emoji, and these are all of the Apple emojis. You can pick another set if you like, but we'll stick with Apple. And we'll add another prop to the picker component called onSelect. This will allow us to add a new emoji to the message that we're adding. So that'll reference a new function called handleAddEmoji. It'll take the emoji that we're selecting from the emoji picker, and within the function we'll first create a variable called oldMessage, which will reference the message value and state, and we'll create a new message variable which will execute a function called :to_Unicode. We'll take, within template literals, the old message, interpolate the old message value, and put a space at the beginning of it and in between our next value, which will interpolate of emoji.colons. So we're referencing a colons property on the emoji object that we're passing to this function. We're going to set the state. We'll set the message property to our new message value and close the emoji picker by setting emoji picker to false. And now I'm going to paste in the code for the :to_Unicode function. It basically takes our message and converts that emoji.colons value to a Unicode using the emoji index tool that we imported. So you can copy the code as you see it here, or get it in the final code attached to this video. And now when we save all the changes we made and we try adding a message like hello and selecting an emoji, we can see it show up within our input, and when we click on add reply we can see it's added to the channel that we specified. Now you'll notice that if we select an emoji, we don't have the input focused after we do so. So we want to fix that, to focus the input again after we select an emoji, by heading down to our input once again, and we'll put a ref on it, which once again will include an inline function. We'll pass through this node value and set it equal to this message input ref value, which we're putting on our class. So now we can reference it and use it to focus our input. So within handleAddEmoji, we're going to add a set timeout, where within the body of the set timeout we're going to call this.messageInputRef.focus to focus the input after 0 milliseconds, so that it runs immediately after our set state. Then on the label, for the button that we supplied to the label prop of our input, we're going to change the icon value to a ternary. If emoji picker's set to true, we're going to give it an icon of close, otherwise an icon of add. And for the content prop, we'll set up a similar ternary where if emoji picker is set to true, it'll have the text of close or the text of null if it's false. We'll save our file once again. We'll head back to our app and see how this works now. We'll toggle the emoji picker, We'll select an emoji. We see our close text. And now our input is refocused after adding an emoji, so we can add more text without having to click on the input. And of course, we can add a reply as usual. Whenever a new message is added, whether we've added the message or someone else has added the message, we always have to scroll to the bottom of the channel in order to see it. It would be a much nicer behavior if we had an auto scroll down to the bottom whenever a new message was added. So to implement this, within our messages component, we'll go all the way down to our comment group, and before the closing tag, we'll add a div which will have our ref. And once again, we'll use an inline function. We'll call this ref messages end. And in order to, whenever a new message is added, scroll to the bottom of the channel to see that message, we'll use the component did update lifecycle method. And even though we won't be using either of the parameters, we have access to previous props and previous state. Whenever our component updates, and if we have a ref of messages end, we'll execute a function called scroll to bottom. So this will scroll our channel to the end, and we'll take the messages end ref and we'll use a method on it called scroll into view. And within that we can put an object where we can set the behavior of the scroll, and we'll set it to smooth scroll this ref into view. So we'll smooth scroll to the div at the very bottom of our messages component. And as you'll see, this will be executed whenever our component updates. So if, for example, we add a message, we immediately go down to the bottom, and it smooth scrolls to the bottom very nicely. And it'll smooth scroll to the bottom in any event whenever we have a new message added by us or another user, or if we see that another user is typing within the same channel. So if I open my deployed application and log in with a different user and start typing, I'm taken down to the bottom both when the other user is typing as well as when the message is added. Whenever our chat loads or whenever we reload the page, we see within our messages area a blank area until our messages are loaded. So this isn't a very good user experience. We want to tell our user that our messages are in the process of being loaded, and we can do that with this messages loading property that we're setting in state in our messages component. So as our messages are being loaded, we'll show this skeleton component that we'll create, where within it this will be a stateless functional component, and it'll first contain a div with a class of skeleton. Within this div, we'll have a number of divs with their own respective classes. First, a div with the class of skeleton avatar, next a div with the class of skeleton author, and then a div with the class of skeleton details. We'll export our skeleton component, and then we'll head to app.css and create the rules for each of these classes within a section that we'll call skeleton.js. So we'll begin with the skeleton class. So this main class will have a position of relative, overflow set to hidden. It'll have a height of 40 pixels, a margin bottom of 10 pixels, and we'll give it a pseudo element of after for additional styling. With the content set to an empty string, we'll set display to block. We'll give it a position of absolute, top will be set to 0, left 0, a width of 50%, a height of 100%, and we'll animate it with this sweep animation, which will last 2 seconds and will be an infinite animation, and we'll include a background image which will be a linear gradient, the values to left, transparent, an RGBA of 255, 255, 255, an opacity of 0.4, and final value of transparent. And we'll set up a keyframes with the name of sweep. As the name of the animation suggests, we'll slowly sweep it across the skeleton div, first by putting the animation on the far left-hand side of the div. So at 0%, we'll give it a translate x of a negative 100%. At 50% of the animation, when it's halfway through, we'll set translate x to 150%, sweep it over to the far right of the div, and then at 100%, we'll return translate x back to negative 100%. So this animation will take place over the course of 2 seconds. And within our skeleton div, we'll have our skeleton avatar class with a height of 35 pixels, a width of 35 pixels, a border radius of 3 pixels, a background color of RGBA 50, 57, 57, and an opacity of 0.3. So this will be the outline of the avatar for a given message. For our skeleton author class, it'll have the same background color value, so we can copy that. It'll have a width of 120 pixels, a height of 10 pixels, a border radius of 3 pixels. Position will be set to absolute. We'll give it a bottom of 30 pixels, a left of 40 pixels, and a right of 0. Then for skeleton details, we'll give it a background color of the same value as skeleton author and skeleton avatar, a height of 20 pixels, border radius of 3 pixels, position absolute again, where bottom will be set to 5 pixels, left 40 pixels, right 20 pixels, and now we'll head back to messages and we'll make sure to import our skeleton component. So with the skeleton component, as the name suggests, it provides a kind of outline for each of our messages that are being loaded to describe to our user beforehand what they'll see in the UI. So now within render, we can destructure messages loading from our state object, and within comment group or comment group component, we'll execute a new function called display messages skeleton, and we'll pass down messages loading to this function. So if messages loading is set to true, and we'll pass it to display messages skeleton as loading. If loading is true, we're going to display first a React fragment, and since the skeleton component represents one message being loaded, but we don't want to display just one skeleton but a number of them to fill up the messages section, we can use a trick where we use the array constructor, pass it a value of 10 to get 10 elements, spread that result into a new array, use the map method where we only use the index parameter. In the return, we return our skeleton. We're now iterating over our skeleton component 10 times. We'll give it a key prop set equal to I, which is why we're using it in the map function. And if loading is set to false, if we're not loading any messages, we're going to return null from display message skeleton. So now in our app, as our messages are being loaded, we'll display our skeleton component to show users the outline of each of the messages before they're actually displayed in the UI. In the past, we've always had to add messages to channels by clicking on the Add Reply button. In order to create an alternative for our users to make sending messages a bit easier, let's set up a key shortcut so that users can just press a succession of keys and very quickly send off a message. We'll do this within the message form component and in the handle key down function. We'll pass through the event, and on the event we'll check to see that they're pressing the control key with event.control key as well as the return key by checking to see if event.keycode is equal to 13. If that's the case, if they're pressing both of those keys at the same time, we'll then send the message. So we'll save that, head back to our app, and we'll first try sending a message the old way. So I'll pick an emoji and then hit add reply. You see our message, but now you can just type the message and hit Control and Enter, and our message is added as well. So this just provides an alternative for users. It's very convenient if you're sending a lot of messages. If you're looking to make your own key shortcuts, there's a very nice tool at keycode.info that will tell you the specific key code of any key that you type in. One of the last steps that we need to take before deployment is that since we've set up a lot of listeners within our components, we need to, when our component unmounts, remove those listeners. So we'll begin in the color panel. We'll set up a component will unmount lifecycle method, and we'll call a function called remove listener. It will remove the one listener that we have set up. So we'll reference users ref as well as the child that we're listening on of this.state.user.uid and the colors property, and then finally call the off method in order to remove that listener that we set up with component did mount. So moving on to our message form component, we have this upload task property in state which holds on to the currently uploading image. And if our component mounts, we don't want to remove a listener, but we do want to cancel any uploads that may be taking place. So if upload task is not equal to null within state, we're going to use the cancel method on it to cancel uploading the file that might be within it, and we'll set state to update the upload task property to null. Then we'll move on to the messages component, and removing the listeners here will require a bit more effort than the other components. Again, we'll set up component will unmount. We'll execute this remove listeners function, which will take in a property from state of listeners set initially to an empty array. We'll collect the information about each of the listeners that we set up on component mount with the listeners array, and we'll add a new element to the listeners array using this add to listeners function. It takes the ID, ref, and event that a given listener is using, and within the function we'll first iterate over the listeners array to check to see if we already have the data stored for a given listener by comparing the ID, ref, and event values that are passed in with each of the elements. And if we can't find the index of an element with each of these values, we're going to add a new object onto the listeners array by creating a new listener object with the property name and values of ID, ref, and event that are passed to it. We'll set the state where we'll update the listeners array by concatenating this new listener object onto the listeners array. Now let's go down to each listener and call add to listeners in order to collect the data for it. So we'll execute add to listeners underneath where we're listing for the child added event for our typing ref. So we'll pass in to the function call channel ID, typing ref, and the channel added event. We can copy that and go underneath the child removed for our typing ref and just change the event argument to child removed. We'll then go to add message listener. We'll change the ref argument to ref, and it'll also pass in an event of child added. Then we'll create our remove listeners function, which will do the work of removing every listener whose data we've stored in this listeners array. So remove listeners, we'll take the listeners array and we'll use the for each method on it. So for each listener, we'll take the ref property on it, we'll put the listener ID value on as a child, and then call off and pass listener.event to the off method. Then within component did mount, if we have a channel and user, we want to remove any listeners, and we can destructure the listeners array there to pass to it. And also within component will unmount, we want to grab the connected ref and call off on that as well. Then moving on to our channels component, we within the remove listeners function that we set up are removing the channels ref listener, but now we need to iterate over the channels array in state using for each in order to, for each of the children that we put on the messages ref, call off on them by passing each channel ID as a child. Then within direct messages, we'll set up component will unmount, we'll execute remove listeners, and remove listeners will be rather simple in this case. We'll just grab the user's ref, call off on that, then we'll grab the presence ref and call off, as well as the connected ref. We'll save that and close it, move on to our starred component, set up component will unmount there, we'll call a function remove listener. We only want to remove one listener where we're listening on our user's ref with a child, where we'll interpolate the user ID /starred and then call off on that. And finally, once we save all of our changes and we're removing all of our listeners, I'll once again use my deployed app. So currently it looks like channels, the starred component, as well as the color panel are being loaded successfully along with the messages. Another user can still type. We see that they're typing, and when they add a new message, we see it show up. We're going to take a look at securing our app by setting up some Firebase rules. But first we'll head into the user panel and we'll change the child for the storage ref. We're going to set the path to avatar/users instead of the dash that we previously had, and the same for the message form. We'll change the path here within get path to chat/private/ the interpolated channel ID. So this will make setting up some rules for our Firebase storage a bit easier. So to access our storage rules, we're going to go to the storage tab, and normally we've been working in the files area, but now we want to move to the rules area, and this is where we can set up some rules in order to better secure our storage so we're not having any files added to our storage that we don't want. So we're going to replace this bucket value with the name of our app, in my case react/clone, and then end it with .appspot.com. We'll remove the code which starts with match/all-paths and replace it with our own rule for the avatar's path. So this match rule is going to match any new images that we're going to try to add to the avatar's path within our storage, and we'll match a subpath of /users/user ID, and we wrap user ID in curly braces since we're going to use this as a variable. We're going to allow reads to images posted to our avatar path if request.auth is not equal to null, if we have an authorized user, and we're going to allow write to add a new image to our avatar path if we have an authorized user, if their UID is equal to the user ID, the end of the path that we're trying to add an image to, as well as if request.resource.content-type if the content type of the image matches the form image/dot*. So if it's of any image type, we're going to allow it to be posted to the avatar path /users/that user ID, and we can also make sure that its size is less than 1 megabyte by saying request.resource.size is less than 1 times 1024 times 1024. That equals 1 megabyte in terms of size. Then for images posted to our chat path, we'll have a subpath which will match /public and then end with a path of anything as represented with image path equals **, since we're using a random string in order to set the end of our image that we're adding to this path. We're going to allow reads once again if our user is authenticated with request.auth not being equal to null. We'll copy all of the rules that we set for our write rules for our avatar's path, and we'll paste it in to our write rules here, but we'll just remove where we're making sure that the user's UID is equal to the user ID, since we're not using that variable here. Then underneath where we're matching /public, we're going to match /private. And here our private channel once again consists of 2 user IDs at the end, user ID 1 and user ID 2, so we'll need this as variables, and then end with an image path of **. We're going to allow reads if request.auth isn't null, as well as if request.auth.uid, the UID of the user that's requesting the image, is equal to either user ID 1 or it's equal to user ID 2. So only the 2 users that we have for the given direct messages channel are going to be able to read those direct messages, no one else. And we're going to allow writes if our user is authenticated, and we can copy this conditional that we set up for reading permissions, and then we'll grab the remaining part of our first write rules, our first set of write rules for avatars, where we're going to make sure that the resource has a content type of image /whatever and that the image size is less than 1 megabyte. So we'll save all these rules, and to test this out back in our app, we want to see if we can post messages with image content to each of our channels. We'll first begin with a public channel. We can still upload an image there. Now in a direct messages channel, we'll do the same. We can also send an image message there, and to change our avatar, we'll select just a different part of the image that we previously used. We'll crop it, we'll click on change avatar, and now we can see within our avatar preview that's been changed. If we send a message, our new avatar is included there as well. Just like we made our storage area more secure by setting the rules for what images could be added to certain paths, we're now going to add rules to our database to determine what data can be read or written to for each of our collections. So we'll create a new rules JSON object, and first for our channels collection, we're going to allow reads with this .read rule by making sure the user is authorized. So if auth is not equal to null. For each channel, we have this dynamic channel ID value. We're going to allow writes, we're going to allow users to create new channels and create this channel ID value if auth is not equal to null. And we're going to validate each new channel that's added with new data.hasChildren. We'll check to make sure each new channel added has the properties ID, name, created by, and details. And we can additionally validate each of these properties within hasChildren. So we'll validate the ID, once again using the validate rule. We'll check to see if the value of this new data, the value of the ID, is equal to the channel ID. We'll make sure that the name on the channel has a length that's greater than 0, and we'll copy this and provide the same rule, but for our details. So the user that's adding the name and details for our new channel has to provide some characters to them. Then for our messages collection, it has a dynamic channel ID value. We'll allow that to be read if auth is not equal to null. We'll use validate again, where we want to take the child of the root. In other words, check to see if the channels collection plus this new channel ID exists within our database using the exists method. On each channel ID, we'll have a unique ID for each message that's added. We'll allow a new message to be created and therefore write permission if auth is not equal to null, and so this is for public channels. And we'll validate what's attached to this message ID. In other words, all of the message information for a new message that's added by checking to see if new data has the children content, user, and timestamp. It has those properties and doesn't have the property image. So this would be for a text message. But we also want to handle the case that our message has image data. So we'll copy all this conditional, use an OR operator, and paste it in afterwards, and replace the content property with image and image with content. So that would handle the case that we have an image message instead of a text message. We'll validate the content property if we have a text message by making sure that new data.value has a length greater than 0. We'll do the same for image, that it has a length greater than 0. And for our user, we can validate them by making sure that they have the children ID, name, and avatar. So they at least have to have these 3 properties. They don't have to have the starred or color properties. Then we'll move on to our private messages collection, where it'll first have a unique ID that we'll call UID1 and another one within it of UID2 for both of the user IDs. We'll read only if auth is not equal to null, and just like the rule that we provided within our storage rules, we'll make sure that the UID1 variable is equal to auth.uid or UID2 is equal to auth.uid. Then that will contain a message ID for each message that's added to our private messages collection, and we can just copy and paste all of the relevant validation that we added previously for a message ID for our messages collection. Then we'll move on to presence, and here we'll allow reads if our user's authenticated, and writes if our user's authenticated. Of course, we're just updating whether they're present within the app or not, whether they're online, and we'll provide the same rules for typing. So every user will enable reads and writes. Then moving on to users, we'll allow reads if the user's authenticated, and it'll have a unique UID value. We'll allow writes if auth isn't equal to null, and the auth UID is equal to this UID value that's being put on the user's collection. And we'll validate new data.hasChildren will make sure that each new user begins with the properties name and avatar. And once again, we'll validate these children for each user that's added. So we want to validate name, so we can grab the name rule that we had above for the name of each channel that's added and paste it down here within users. And we'll provide the same rule for avatar. You could change the length to your own custom value, say 5 or 6 if you'd like. But for now, we'll just hit publish, make sure we don't have any errors with any of our rules. And so now we've locked down our database. Now let's move on to deploying our app to the web. We'll do so using the npm package firebase tools. So in our terminal, we'll end the development server and install firebase tools as a global package with the -g flag. You might need to put sudo in front of it according to your user's permissions. And once it's installed, we'll run the command firebase login. You'll be asked to log in to Firebase using Google OAuth. And once that's done, we'll run firebase init to initialize our Firebase project. Then the CLI is going to take us through a number of steps. The first will be to choose which CLI features we want to set up for this folder. And we'll select both the database and storage options with our spacebar, since we use both of those in our project, and then hit enter. Then we'll be asked to choose the Firebase project that we want to deploy. We'll select that, and then it'll ask which file should be used for our database rules. And we'll choose the default of database.rules.json, as well as the default for the storage rules, storage.rules.json. What this will do, what the CLI will do, is we'll bring in all the rules that we specified in our Firebase console and put them as a JSON file within our project. So if we click on database.rules.json, we can see all of the rules that we just set up in the past couple of sections, and the same applies to the storage rules file. We'll head to this firebase.json file that was also added, and we're going to provide some additional configuration here to tell Firebase Hosting how to host our app. But first we'll run the command npm run build to create a production version of our React app. So that should have taken all of our JavaScript files and bundled them into this build folder for production. And to deploy our app to the web, we need to add a configuration setting within our firebase.json. We'll add a property name of hosting to the JSON object, in which we're going to tell the CLI to look within the build folder and make it the public folder that will deploy to the web. Once we've configured that, we'll run firebase deploy, which will deploy everything within our build folder. And at the very end, it'll tell us our hosting URL, where we can find our app on the web. We'll paste that in to our browser. We can see our app starting up as usual. We can log in, the pre-existing user, or we can register. Hit submit. You can see our app start up as usual. We'll provide a new message to show that we've actually deployed our project and that it's running live on the web.